Welcome back to the Wise Up Podcast, your weekly dose of business wisdom. I am your host, Chris Albrecht. And as always, we are getting sort of business smarts from the members of Open Water. And today I am thrilled to be chatting with Dave Zinman. Listen, he's got a really substantial background. He's a veteran tech exec and C-level leader. He's a founder. He's had an immense journey. And today we're going to be talking about that kind of journey, right? Specifically around how startups grow and leadership when they grow and different perspectives on that. So first, let me welcome to the show, Dave. Thanks for being here.
Hey, it's great to be here. Hello to the Open Water community. I'm thrilled to be doing this.
You've been through a lot. You've done a lot. You've gone through exits. You've been a founder. You've done all kinds of things. But tell me a little bit about your background and why this topic of leadership and sort of growth and startups and tech in particular is so important to you.
Yeah, thanks so much. I really appreciate the forum, and I'm really glad to be talking about this topic. It's really close to my heart. I started my journey in tech by being a founder. I graduated from Stanford Business School mid-90s, right at the dawn of the dot-com era, and I started a company, built the first ad server. So we were kind of in the early days of ad tech. And my journey there, being a founder and ultimately having to replace myself, was seminal for me, foundational for me. And the emotional journey that you go through in that process is difficult. And even though I saw all the upsides of, great, I get to bring in somebody who knows what they're doing, and I get to learn from somebody, and my equity maybe will be worth more because somebody who knows what they're doing will be running this company. I saw all those things, but still it's a very tough emotional journey. And the rest of my career has really been going into companies that were founded by somebody, largely partnering with the founders to help them scale. And usually there's that inflection point where the skills that the founder brought that got the company to a certain place won't necessarily take them where they want to go. And so they're either thinking about succession or they're thinking about surrounding themselves with the right talent. And that moment, it's a crucible moment in the growth of a startup. And so excited to be talking about it here. And just to fill out a little bit, that startup I founded had a successful outcome. We sold for $200 million back in 1999. But the reality was our biggest, most successful competitor was DoubleClick. They were worth 10x that. And I always think about all the things we could have done better or differently to get there. And I've been through other successful exits, and I've had failures as well. So I've kind of seen this journey of the startup and excited to talk about it.
Okay, so I want to touch real quick first on your point, right? So startups, founders, we'll just say like the garage myth, right? Like two people in a garage building something, and then they get it to a point and they get funding. And a former colleague of mine used to always say, like, there are builders and scalers, right? Which I thought was a really interesting way of putting it, right? Now, when do you, I guess, what are you in your mind? Like, so you've been a builder and a scaler. Where do you think you lie in that spectrum?
I gotcha. Yeah, some people describe that as 0 to 1 or 1 to N. I'm definitely more of a 1 to N person. I mean, I definitely, the word builder is close to me because you're always building as you're growing and scaling a company. But yes, I'm much more interested and have a lot of more affinity for, we've got a team that we need to align and we need to motivate and we need to hold accountable. And that requires some resources and some proof points in market to really get that motivated. So usually I'm looking at companies that are trying to scale.
So, okay, so that's really interesting. So when do you think, like, how does that conversation begin? Right? There are obviously numbers. So a company is like, oh, they've got a couple of founders, they've built a product, they found product market fit, right?
Yep.
And then how does that discussion begin around, oh, we need to maybe change things up here, right? Because it can be really hard for a founder and CEO to let go of the CEO role, right? And maybe they can recognize like, oh, I've seen the numbers and we need to do this, right? But sort of tell me about the genesis of that conversation. Where do you think that begins, for figuring out what you need next, to your point, the 1 to N?
Sure. Yeah, I could talk about it a number of different ways, but that inflection point, the point at which a founder collectively with their board realizes that they need new skills inside a company needs to happen ideally after you reach product market fit. And product market fit, just briefly to touch on that for a second, means that there's conviction and proof points that the dogs are eating the dog food, right? That the customers want what the company is offering, and the company is seeing traction with those customers and success with those customers. So the scale of that, the numbers can vary by company, but generally what I've seen is you need to have 10 million in revenue or more to say, okay, we've really proven something. That's a scale for software. Like if you're at 10, 20 million in revenue, you're probably past the product market fit stage. The moment when these decisions become apparent is usually that inflection point where the growth rate is slowing, meaning that the year-over-year rate at which revenue is being added is slowing down, and the company's got to ask tough questions about what are we not doing that we need to do to scale this business. It could be like one of the common issues tends to be that the way the company was operating pre-market fit was the founder had a singular vision. They had the passion for it. They understood the product and the customers at an elemental level. And what they would do is they would just go around the company, tell people what to do every day. And so that hub and spoke system works in a small startup. But then as you start to add leaders and want to figure out how to scale and innovate and drive the next set of business opportunities for the company, all of a sudden at that point, that system doesn't work because the founder can't stay on top of every person and every decision. You need to invest in building leaders. So you need to hold them accountable to an outcome and not just the project they're working on this week. And that kind of change, that transformation is often a spur to say, hey, we need to think differently about leadership at the company.
And what are the skills you think that are required, right? So you are the 0 to 1, you're building a product, you've probably got a lot of, I won't say strictly design, but you know what I mean? Like you're building a product, so you're trying to get it to fit, right? And then a scaler seems to have a completely different skill set. What do you think are the skills that make someone a successful sort of person who can step in and take the reins?
Sure. Okay. So first off, let me just say that the outcome of that inflection point doesn't have to be that the CEO is replaced. It could be that, for example, there's a COO brought in to work with the CEO who has the skills. It could be a mentor to that CEO to help them, or it could be some key positions that are filled that take some load off the plate of that person. So there's a bunch of variety of outcomes, but the skills that often are not there are the skills that are developed when somebody's been through that level of scale before. So if you're a software company, 20 million in revenue, and the CEO has only seen that company before, they don't know what's coming next. They don't know what great looks like in a company that's 50 million or 100 million in revenue. And so you want to bring in somebody who's seen that before. That's number one. Number two, because founders often have to be willing to run through walls and to just make stuff happen by sheer force of will, they're often not spending a lot of time thinking about how are the other people in the company motivated by this experience? How can I get them to take that same energy themselves and be their own entrepreneurs in this company? And that's a tricky thing. That requires them to have a different set of softer skills around communication, around listening, motivation. There's a bunch there. And so having somebody that's seen the scale and then has some of those softer skills can make a big difference.
Got it. So let's just, what I kind of want to focus on here right now is just sort of this idea of bringing in different leadership. And we're just going to, for right now, let's just talk about sort of bringing in a new CEO.
Sure.
Right. There are two sides to that equation. And we've talked a little bit about the inflection point when a founder has to, with the board, kind of come to a realization like, oof, we need somebody to help take this to the next level. Right. And then there's the other side, which is, somebody coming in. And what I'm wondering is if you are on the side, if you are the founder and you're like, okay, yes, we need to bring in a new CEO, what are the steps you can take to really set that next person up for success?
Yeah. That's great. I do have a book recommendation for founders and board members who are thinking about this, there's a book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There.
Mm.
And I learned a lot about the things that the biases I bring to companies, and everybody who absorbs it is gonna learn about some of their biases, which is really good. So it's seeing the gaps you have that helps you grapple with the kind of person you want to bring in, and then how to set them up for success. A couple of things that can be done during this process to set up a new CEO or even a new COO for success are: number one is, prior to the start, the founder and the new leader need to have a really clear assessment of what their skill sets are, what they're really good at, and what they're not good at. And they need to have a candid conversation together about that. And out of that comes a role definition that's really clear. So, for example, if you're bringing in a new CEO or a new COO, the leadership of the company needs to understand the reasons why that's happening, because all of the people that are there bought into working for that founder already, right? So this is going to be a big change. Even if it's a COO coming to help that founder, everyone needs to understand, why are we creating this role? Who is this person? What are they going to be tasked with? What's their definition of success? And so you agree on that ahead of time, and then you spend the time talking individually to the key leaders to make sure they understand the reasons why this is happening, and the opportunity the company has by making this change. Like, that's incredibly important. And then there's a whole bunch of steps we can talk about, like once you kick off a new leader inside the company, how you set that person up for success. But you can't do it well unless you've done this pre-selling.
And then on the other side of that, because I do want to get into once they're installed, right? So
Yeah.
what can the incoming leader do to make the transition more seamless?
Yeah, there is something that it's taken me trial and error to learn. And you can read this in like management books that will recommend this, but I've made explicit now when I come into a new company that I want a period of time where I am not making any decisions, and I am just going to listen and learn and get ramped up. I ask the entire company when I'm introduced, I say, please give me 30 days, 60 days. No one's going to report to me. I don't come to me with decisions, but I'm going to learn what the real problems are here, what the real opportunities are, where I need to focus. And then I will be able to help much better by being that informed. And so I think making that explicit, buying yourself some time to get to a place where you're able to act efficiently, and you're demonstrating to everyone in the company that you actually want to hear what they have to say. You're not coming in with like some canned response. Like, every time I come into a company, first thing I do is I lay off 20% of the people, and then I reorganize, the leadership team, and I bring in my buddies. No, you're going to listen to what all these valuable people who have been investing their lives in this company have to say, and you're going to then filter that and make good decisions.
I think that's really important, because you get this sort of like outsider syndrome, just like, well, you should be doing this, right? And then people are like, well, we did that 2 years ago, and you know what I mean? Like, well, duh, you aren't the only one who thought of that. So I think that's really key, spending that time listening.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. And you know what? It buys so much credibility too, because
Yeah.
people then know, okay, the leader is not going to be capricious. They're not coming in and creating uncertainty. They're going to hear what people are saying inside the company and take that into account. And a lot of the angst and the emotional energy goes into the uncertainty that exists when you bring a new leader in, right? Because everyone says, oh, do I have to prove myself again? And, oh, what changes are going to happen? How's this going to affect me?
Yeah. I want to touch on briefly, without getting too far into specifics, because as you're making that transition, right? Like, the founder is moving to a different role within the company, but they've built the whole thing. And then a leader is coming in to really sort of accelerate the value. What are the typical things around, like, stock or equity and, compensation, again, without getting specifically into numbers, but are there some general things people should expect, right? Like, cause again, the equity's got to come from somewhere. And
Yep.
if you're bringing in the person, they're going to want a certain amount because they're going to take it to a place. So what are the discussions like that around sort of those structures?
Sure. Okay. So for sure, you do not want to bring in a new leader unless they are heavily aligned with the interests of the shareholders. So, the whole logic for giving equity comes into play here. And equity is really important because you're going to be asking someone to make big decisions, possibly change course, innovate, do a lot of change management in the company. And the purpose of that is you're being hired by the board of directors who represent the shareholders to have to create value for those shareholders. So you want to grant equity, and CEOs get extraordinary amounts of equity. The exact amount depends on the company, the stage it's at, a bunch of considerations. I could tell you though that if you're at a 10 or $20 million run rate as a software company, then you'd expect the CEO of that company, that you're hiring and bringing in, to be getting at least 5% of that company, if not closer to 10%. So it's like a significant amount of equity that will be in the form of dilution to the existing shareholders, right? So it'll be creating new shares that'll be granted usually in the form of options to that person. There's also a cash component. It's not, these hires are not inexpensive for sure. But the logic is, hey, what's the upside value of this company and how do we realize it in the most effective way? And if we've determined that we need a new leader, it's worth every penny to do that.
Right. Okay. So, all right. So you are bringing in, let's say you're a company and you're bringing in somebody. We've laid the groundwork on both ends, right? To your point, like the founding team has set up systems in place to really make sure that there is buy-in for everybody coming in.
Yep.
The person coming in is really made an effort to not be capricious and to listen and really, and everybody is in alignment, right? So that's great. So, but what if we sort of tilt that scenario just a little bit? And what if like the decision is not made to bring on a CEO, right, to help scale the company to the next, but some other sort of leadership position? What is sort of your take on that, either through your own personal experience or what you've seen, right? So it may not be, hey, we're not bringing on a CEO, but we're bringing on a COO, or we're bringing on something. Like, what are the things that should happen in that scenario to ensure success?
Yeah. Well, that happens quite a bit. And the kind of the model that everyone wishes to follow is kind of the Mark Zuckerberg, Sheryl Sandberg model, right? That's the prototypical example of where a COO was brought in and had this huge outside impact on the success of the company, made a first-time founder who had never seen any of the scale that he was dealing with successful, right? That's an amazing partnership. And that requires, there's another overlay on top of the complexity of doing a succession to a new CEO. Now you've got the overlay of the founder and the new, let's say, COO need to be really aligned, right? Those two people have to do a mind meld together. I've come into several companies as the COO, and I have to say it can work really well, but can also fail. And a lot of that prep work I talked about ahead of time applies here, where you want to get really clear about what the responsibilities are going to be, the division of labor between the two people, and then how are they going to work together? What's the way of working that is going to allow them both to shine? And oftentimes, this is a good outcome because the founder, who's the CEO, brings so much passion and so much knowledge that while you do recognize gaps in those people, you can see how much value they bring to the company. And if you could find a way to augment them, you can have this great success. I'll give you one example, which is I joined a company called Drawbridge in 2017. The founder of the company had been at it for almost a decade. She was a fierce leader, brilliant, probably the smartest person I've ever worked with. But she was about to try to execute a major pivot where she was going to divest a majority of the revenue of the company to try to focus on the core product what the company was all about. And she needed help. So I joined as COO to help execute that. We went through, we sold part of the company. We moved 60 employees out of 160 to another company. We focused the business. I hired a completely new go-to-market leadership team. We repositioned the company, and we hit the market just perfectly well. We got very lucky, but we executed really well. We literally tripled the revenue of the company in 1 year, which is an extraordinary thing to do in software when you have recurring revenue. So it was an amazing outcome, and as a result of that, as a result of that scaling and the success we had, we got bought by LinkedIn, which is at that point was owned by Microsoft. So it was really an amazing shareholder outcome for the company, and it came because the founder, she's brilliant, but she also recognized that there were lots of things that she didn't know, and she wanted to bring in skills. And we were able to get to a mind meld together, where we could work together, and she could appreciate what I brought. I had a lot of understanding and empathy for what she was bringing to the company as well. So it's an amazing story, and like those kinds of outcomes are hard to come by. But that it was that COO role that ended up enabling her to achieve that success.
I want to touch on something that we sort of alluded to earlier, right? Like when you are bringing in new leadership to an existing entity, right? What you really want to make sure is that there's values alignment. And that can be really hard because, this person might want to really be a CEO. And so they'll overlook some other things at the company, or they might hide particular things that they, and not even out of like, malice, but it could just be like, oh, I don't need to bring that up. If they're not going to ask me about it, I'm not going to bring it up anyway. So, but you need to get everybody sort of pulling in the same direction, because it's not like you're just hiring, a lower level person in the hierarchy. You're hiring the person who's setting the vision for the company. How do you ensure that you are sort of, as best you can, aligning values between the two parties?
Yeah, this is such an important point. And I have to say, some of the most difficult situations I've been in have been because of a lack of values alignment. And it's something that I'm sure everyone listening to this knows inherently that it's important that you believe in the values of the company you're joining, that ends up being important. But at these senior leadership positions, it becomes fatal if you don't invest the time to understand that. So understanding the character of the leaders and the board members are really important. And you can do this through an interview cycle. So I'm talking from the point of view of the candidate being brought in, but the same is true of the company, right? Assessing the track record of the person that they're bringing in and what kind of person they are, and how well does that match the culture that the company has developed and the values the companies have developed. This is like, a lot of times people think of values as, oh, they're just slogans, but the reality is the real values of the company are what you need to assess and whether they match with somebody. And I can give a specific example. Early in my career, I joined a company. The founder had left earlier before I joined, and I came in at a VP level. And I came to know in the company that the founder had engaged in a bunch of kickback schemes while they were in the company. So they built out a really impressive office space, but those contractors that did that also built his house for free.
Ooh.
Like stuff like that was going on. And, I hate to say it, but some of that permeated the culture of that company. There were some really poor decisions. And this is something I'm sure a lot of people listening to this will say, well, I wouldn't want to join a company like that. And you're damn right, but it's hard to know everything before you walk in the door. So I would encourage candidates and boards to invest in having the dialogue around what are the values that the company has today, that the candidate's bringing in. How do they behave? How do they deal with challenges, like when stress occurs? When you have to make tough decisions, you have to pivot. How do people handle that? And that's when you get a sense, in the way you're talking to people, what that will be like. But investing in that ahead of time is going to be so important.
I can understand why. I mean, to your point, right? Like, do your due diligence, right? Like, find out, talk to people, see what you can. Totally
Absolutely.
makes sense. So we've talked a lot about what you've done and sort of helping other founders and potential, CEOs sort of come in to roles. But I'm wondering just sort of what's next for you as you've sort of taken on these roles. How does that inform what you're going to do next?
Yeah, I'd love to say that I've learned everything there is to know about coming into a company and scaling it, but every company I learn more. And that's like, you got to have that kind of growth mindset, especially in tech where things change so rapidly. But in short, I'm looking for the next opportunity to help a company scale. So I'm looking for full-time roles, CEO, COO, software companies in SaaS or digital consumer services. And this kind of role, I hate to say it, but it's true. These roles take a long time to find the right match. And so a lot of times I'm doing what I'm doing now, which is I do a lot of advising work. I do some fractional work along the way, and it's great fun. I get to help founders think about their businesses, and maybe that turns into an opportunity for me down the road. But I get a lot out of it in the meantime. So that's what I'm in the middle of now.
Excellent. Well, if somebody wanted to
Yeah.
find you, where's the best place for them to look?
Well, if this is open water, you can DM me direct on open water. And of course, you can find me on LinkedIn for sure. DM me there.
Dave Zinman,
Yes.
Zinman. Thank you so much for being on the show today. We really appreciate it. It's very insightful for founders and CEOs alike. So thank you so much, Dave.
You got it. It's great to talk.